Good afternoon. It's good to be here again with CASPA. I've been here quite a few times actually over the years with CASPA. My name is Mario Morales and I manage the semiconductor practice for IDC. So what I want to talk to you a little bit about today is what I see the market, where I see the market going over the next 5 years, but also get into a little bit more about the challenges for all of you as engineers, because I think we're seeing a very big transformation, not only in the markets that you're going to be participating in, but how your job and the way you approach the technology is going to really change. I think when you think about semiconductors, we always tend to think about hardware engineering, but more and more what differentiates a device, what differentiates the cloud, is software and services. And so one of the fundamental things we're seeing in the semiconductor space now is the fact that there's a lot more investment now by semiconductor companies in software. And if you look very closely at the R&D spend and the mix of R&D within any major semiconductor company, it's heavily geared towards software. Just as an example, over the last 5 years, we've seen a very big transformation in mobile phones and now with tablets. But when you think about how these devices are really designed, over 80% of the design effort now is in software development. And so I see that not only as an important opportunity for all of you, but also a very big challenge. Because when I look at not necessarily the Chinese community, but I look at the Chinese-based companies, this is an area where they have not really invested very heavily in. So I hope when I talk to you today about where I see the market going, I also want to point out the sense of urgency that you need to change, that you need to really have to transform and be a part of the change that we see for the total market over the next 5 years. So my agenda is to give you a quick update on where we see the market landscape, talk a little bit about some of the major growth drivers that we see. I'll get into some of the system forecasts, tell you how big the tablet market is or how big the smartphone market is, along with PCs. Then I'll get into a little bit more about the semiconductor market, because that's of course my background. And then I'll talk and end my conversation by giving you at least my perspective on where we see the market going next, especially some of the very interesting technologies that are a combination, again, of hardware and software technologies, but they're all being closely combined, and that's really, really changing the dynamics that we see across the whole space. Today, when you think about competitors, you think of competing mostly with semiconductor companies. If you're in the semiconductor world today, and I believe my colleague told me that over 80% of you are in the semiconductor space, but over time, the customers that you have today could potentially be your competitors as well. There's going to be a lot more competition in the future within the space. And just like you're seeing today, Apple invests not just in software and services, they're making heavy bets also in semiconductor technology. So it really points to how critical your business really is. And I think you're going to see the same thing from a Google, you'll see Microsoft, you'll see other companies explore the same thing, just like we're seeing semiconductor companies also get a lot more vertical. So I think these are the challenges, and this is where I think the market needs to go, and the type of investment that you need to make, not just over the next 5 years, but over the coming decades. So just some quick background on just the market landscape, because I get this question asked a lot, is what's going to happen in the second half of the year? How do we look at 2012? And of course, the semiconductor market has been sort of riddled with a lot of volatility over the last probably couple of years, not just because of the financial crisis that we went through, but also just the amount of change that our industry undergoes. And right now, the macro uncertainty is still growing. We see EMEA facing a lot of challenges, and we think that some of that might lead to more of a deterioration in some of those markets. The US market, even though a lot of people tend to really quickly look at the unemployment rate and the consumer confidence, it still has remained kind of resilient. And we think that if you look closely at the numbers, even though they still look very anemic, from a GDP basis, we're still growing. And we've been growing over the last 25 months or so. So we've gotten out of that big recession that we went through, even though there are still some challenges. As you know, we have a very important election year next year. And typically when you have election years, you also tend to have a lot more volatility in the overall economy. But what I want to leave you with here is don't think about the next 6 months or the next 12 months or even the next year and a half or so, because we might see some macroeconomic factors that will impact us, but I think you should be thinking about the investment that you have to keep making now. Because like I said before, our industry is transforming. It's not just moving from computing in what we've traditionally seen in PCs and servers, but now computing is going everywhere. We think the brick growth, and my colleagues will talk more about this, is going to continue to balance the uncertainty that we see in the developed regions. There's so much change happening in terms of government policy just around the world that is attracting a lot more investment. We're seeing a huge migration in urbanization where more and more people are going into cities. I mean, you clearly see it in China when you travel there, or you can go in India or anywhere else these days. Any developed region is just getting a lot more urbanized. We think that the middle class is also growing. I mean, if you look at just back in 2000, the middle class was just over 20% of the entire world. And we think that over the next 10 years or so, it will easily be over 50%. So we're clearly seeing a shift in the middle class. And now, of course, the middle class will be different if you're in the US or you're in India or you're in China or even Vietnam. But my point is still the same. We're still seeing a propensity for growth in terms of the middle class. Population, of course, is also growing and will continue to grow over the next decade or so. Today, there are over 7 billion people on this planet. And I'll get into some of those numbers as well. But one of the interesting things that I want to point out too is that when people think of the BRIC regions and they think of the emerging markets, they naturally assume that those markets are only closely tied to Europe or the US. But in reality, we're seeing a lot more inter-regional type of trade and development. And because of that, we think that that's going to neutralize some of the uncertainty that we see in some of the more developed markets, whether it's Japan or Germany or somewhere else. There's been a battle that's just beginning. A lot of people ask me this question almost every single day. Hey, what do you think about Intel versus ARM? Or what do you think about this versus that when you think about the PC or the tablet or the smartphone? And what I tell them is that we're just seeing the beginning of change and a beginning of the transformation. The PC volumes today, they're not growing like they were over the last couple of years, but they're still growing. The quick thing is that a lot of people tend to look at this and say, oh, but it's not growing as fast as a tablet or a smartphone. But I think over time, you'll realize that a lot of these products are not going to displace one or another. But what's going to be more important for you to be thinking about is how do I take the content that I'm consuming on one device and share it across the other devices, and I think, or the services that you have. And I think that's the mindset that you have to take, because I think that some of these markets will grow and will grow very fast, and I'll show you some of the numbers, but at the same time, this transformation is going to take a very long time. This is not just going to be a tablet world or a smartphone world. There's a huge amount of embedded systems that are invisible to most of us, but today,